After the tone, please state your name, followed by the pound sign. You will now be placed into the conference.
A set of points
Muted.
at the bottom of it, titled Canada's Only National Provider of Shared Essential Digital Research Infrastructure. So Compute Canada leads our National Advanced Research Computing Platform. And so I'm going to say the word ARC a few times in the presentation. ARC just refers to any computing you need to do to get your research done. That's too big to do on your laptop, on your desktop, or on the machine that you shove under your lab workbench. So advanced research computing could include cloud services. It could include high-performance computing. It could improve trying to push a large quantity of data through a machine in what's called high-throughput computing. There's lots of different technical terms that fit within this umbrella of ARC, and it's that umbrella within that umbrella that Compute Canada creates services. So as it says here on the slide, there's no other major supplier in Canada. We are the nationally funded provider, and that means we provide services to academic researchers in all disciplines in all parts of the country. The way this is structured is as a not-for-profit corporation. There's more than 35 now of Canada's major research institutions and hospitals that are members of the corporation. The funding is through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, CFI. So the funding is a usual CFI funding scheme of 40% CFI, 60% from matching sources like provinces and institutions, and we all work together in a federated model that includes some of the employees being in the Compute Canada central office, some of the employees being on your local campus to answer questions and to sit and do consultations with researchers where the researchers live. So together we provide shared services to over 11,000 researchers currently across Canada. There's no fee involved in using the services, so at the end of this slide deck we'll talk about how you can just sign up, get an account, and start getting to work. However, if you do need more resources than you can get through just having an account, you can ask for large quantities of resources through an annual competition. We call this our RAC, our Resource Allocation Competition process. So large requests are in a merit-based access system, but you don't need to go through that process in order to get started working. The access model is based on faculty members. So if you're a faculty member at a Canadian institution, then you can create an account for yourself, and then you can sponsor any number of collaborators to work underneath your account, and that includes graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, external collaborators, people from other countries, people from industry. It's entirely up to you. If you happen to be connected and you're a student or a postdoc and not a faculty member, then what you need to do is get your faculty supervisor to sign up for an account, and then you can request one. And it's quite a simple process once the structure is put in place where you have a sponsoring faculty member. So if we go on to the next slide, which shows a pie chart, this is slide 3, about the different disciplinary areas that make use of Compute Canada. This is just a snapshot taken a little over a year ago of faculty members across the country, their self-identified disciplinary area. And it shows the breakdown of different fields and disciplines. So the largest grouping here, the dark blue, is engineering, math, and computer sciences. So you can see the second largest grouping is medical, biological, and life sciences. And of course, chemistry and biochemistry can be quite closely tied into medical, biological, and life sciences as well. So if we take that medical, biological, and life sciences slice of the pie, and we're to look at it over time, this is the slice of the pie that has grown the most over the last few years and is currently growing very fast. And I'll have a stat or two about how fast in a few minutes. But the purpose of this pie chart is to show that with this shared infrastructure and these shared services, we're serving a really wide range of different needs. people may have different scientific use cases in mind, but the underlying hardware needed to fulfill that use case is often the same or very similar. And so the shared platform that CompuCanada Canada provides is an efficient way to meet needs from a variety of disciplines. So I'm going on to slide 4. This is just, I guess, evidence that the people in that previous pie chart are actually using CompuCanada Canada resources to publish papers in a very broad array of different fields. And so what this chart shows is an analysis we did of about 16,000 papers. These are papers that various faculty members that use our services have identified as being supported by CompuCanada Canada resources. And so these are self-reported as having done some part of their work on CompuCanada Canada to generate the paper. And you can see a wide variety of different disciplines listed down the left-hand side. The value of the horizontal bars is something called the field-weighted citation impact. And so if you publish a paper that receives exactly the average number of citations for a paper in that particular discipline, you would end up with at a value of 1 on this chart. And so by definition, this is the world average, the yellow line, the yellow vertical line at 1. And what these bars represent is that all of these disciplines publishing with CompuCanada Canada resources are above the world average. They're all to the right of the yellow line. The gray bars represent the Canadian average, and so if you see some blue sticking out to the right-hand side, it means that they're also above the Canadian average by the size of the blue bar. So you can see in a very wide variety of fields, Canadians are publishing using CompuCanada Canada resources and are exceeding both the world average and Canadian average in terms of how often those works are cited. So if you go on to the next slide, slide 5, this talks a little bit about the overall growth of users. And so you can see that over the last 5 years or so, the number of users has gone from something like 1,500 or 1,700 faculty members to over 3,000 faculty members. So as of today, it's around 3,300. When we very first started this project, it was more like 1,000. So it's gone up dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years. On to slide 6. Looking at that drilling down a little bit on that, over the 1-year period from 2015 to 2016, we saw a 16% growth in faculty accounts, and then year over year, you can see the highest growth areas in percentages. In terms of relative growth, earth sciences, medical, biological, and life sciences, and humanities and social sciences are all showing strong growth. But if you remember that pie chart, medical, biological, and life sciences is much, much larger as a slice of the pie. And so while the relative growth in environmental and earth sciences is large, the absolute number of users added in medical, biological, and life sciences is much, much higher than the other two put together. Go on to slide 7. So in the past, so as Kelly mentioned, I'm a particle physicist. I've been trying to deal with data sets that are too big for a long time. And these are traditionally, the kinds of projects I'm on are traditionally called big science projects, because every paper I publish with 3,000 of my closest friends. So there was a time when the only group of people who had this kind of large data handling problem were people like me in these big science projects that had to move very large quantities of data all around the world, process them, and get information out. That's not the case anymore. It's now the case that people in a very wide variety of disciplines can generate huge quantities of data with instruments that can fit in a single laboratory and can be purchased by a single faculty member or by a single institute. So the reduction in cost, for example, in next generation sequencers is causing this expansion of the types of problems that can be considered in a variety of fields. And it's not just, of course, human health, but also agriculture, natural resources, et cetera. And so this is really has the potential to transform health research And so if we're, as Compute Canada, going to support that transformation, then we have to adjust what we offer to properly suit these emerging big data disciplines. So on to slide 8. One of the things we did starting back in 2014 was to create a kind of resources competition called Research Platforms and Portals, which I'll usually call RPP. So starting in 2014, we gave a way for people to apply for resources not as individual faculty members with a specific line of research they want to pursue. We had that already. But rather to support platforms that enable many researchers to share data sets or to share tool sets and make those available to a broader community. So I said earlier that we have 11,000 active researcher accounts in Compute Canada today. We have more than 100,000 users that use the platform in some way through a research platform or portal. And most of that's quite lightweight. Some research group has created a web portal with a really useful tool that people from all around the world want to use, and they access the web portal, which is in behind, supported by Compute Canada resources. And it can support many, many thousands of users on a single portal. So the research platforms and portals competition has changed the types of services we support, and I think they've been very successful in creating adoption or enabling adoption of new ARC technologies in a wide variety of fields. So on page 9, I talked a little bit more about research platforms and portals. These allow people to build some project-oriented communities or data repositories to be shared. It makes it easier to do national and international collaborations. I mentioned that anybody can sponsor international collaborators to get a Compute Canada account if you want. But it's easier, of course, if you create a platform in which you can have 10,000 people sign up and not have to get a Compute Canada account. And that's allowed through research platforms and portals. People have used this competition, or they've used resources in their own laboratories to build easy-to-use portals to share tools or data sets with people around the world for less technically inclined people. And this has been very useful for the community. This allows analysis reproducibility. So if you come in and you wish to reproduce an analysis that's already been done elsewhere, you can use the platform provided that maybe was originally used for the original paper. And then processing of ever-growing data generated by health scientists. Health science, I would say non-traditional big computing areas, where traditional is defined by computer scientists and physicists and engineers. Non-traditional areas have made the most use of this platform's idea because there's such a fast-growing data set, such a fast-growing fields with such fast-growing data sets that there need to be some kind of structure, some kind of framework in which the research is done, and that data and tools are shared, and this gives that kind of access. So on slide 10, it shows a variety of different logos. These are logos of projects, platforms, portals that are supported by Compute Canada. So you may have interacted with some of these in the past. Some of them are on genomics, like GenApp, or infectious diseases, like RITA, on neuroinformatics or neuroimaging, like CBrain or BrainCode. So all of these may appear to you as cbrain.ca or genapp.ca or rita.ca, and they have their own logos and their own projects, and you may never know that they're actually running on Compute Canada resources in the background. But that's the case. So we're happy to support projects that don't end in .computecanada.ca. That's fine. And so that's the end of the first section of the slide deck. I'm happy to take some questions now before we go on to Greg's section of the presentation, or if you want to save them up and ask questions at the end, I'm also happy to take questions then.
I don't think there's any questions, so we'll go right to Greg. Greg, are you there?
Greg, you might need to press *7 to unmute.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
All righty. So we're on slide 12 now, and we have just a couple of slides that really just give a little bit of the background that ties into what Dugan mentioned earlier, and then we're going to see a short movie, so get ready for that. This slide really is a definition. It says that supercomputing is revolutionizing industry and becoming the third pillar of scientific discovery alongside theory and experiment, and mentions that it's essential digital infrastructure. And it's essential digital infrastructure for all types of research. Obviously today we're focused on health research, and we'll have a couple of examples. When we talk about the third pillar of scientific discovery, this is something that you are probably engaged with already, even if you don't think of it this way, because we're still doing theory, we're still doing experiment, and this idea of having simulation, modeling, aspects of data analysis, obviously that might include things like data visualization. This is all part of what this essential digital infrastructure enables. Let's go ahead to slide 13. And this has just a few more words that help to lay the groundwork here. The idea of what we do, and Dugan alluded to this earlier within Compute Canada, is once you have exceeded the ability of your desktop, or your laptop, or your workstation, well, you need to go somewhere else. You need to move your computation or data storage or analysis or visualization to a larger resource or a larger set of resources. And that's what Compute Canada does.
Thanks for the office of Emily Hill. Oh, just a reminder to everybody to do *6 to mute their line. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, that wasn't a question. It was just someone talking off the side there. So the idea here is that anything really that's beyond the desktop is within the domain of Compute Canada. And it's not the case that every single person that has, needs that exceed these has to use Compute Canada. That's up to you, and sometimes it's up to your funding agency and your your organizational home and that sort of thing. But that's what we're here for, anything beyond the desktop. And usually we think in terms of clusters or supercomputers. They're really the same thing. It's the idea of a supercomputer is that it's a bunch of different computers clustered to work together and working together to solve these big problems, whether it's a problem that has a lot of data throughput or a lot of computational activity, or some sort of combination of the two. And as it says there in the last thing, we're mentioning again that this is what people use these days for scientific discovery. And as Dugan mentioned in the bibliometric slide, this is a method, computation is a method by which people achieve research impact. So what's up next is a brief movie, and I think we're ready for the brief movie. This is about 53 seconds, and it's going to play over your computer speakers via the WebEx. So if you're listening on the phone, which I think most people are, then you'll want to make sure your volume on your computer is up, but not too high so you don't blast your eardrums. But we'll have about a 53-second video that highlights one of our recent accomplishments back at SFU.
Okay, we'll just see if this plays. If not, we'll have to keep going.
Bear with us for a second. We have the video up. And now it's hesitating. I think we might have to revisit this at the end because our platform seems to be handling this a little bit differently with the volume of users that we have on the service right now. So I think we'll move back to the presentation and we'll revisit the movie if we can.
Sure, that's fine. We'll go on to the next slide, which will be slide 14. And what we're doing here is we have a few slides that are just sort of setting the framework and giving a little more substance to what it is that Compute Canada does and what we can offer. And the movie, by the way, I think we can distribute a link after the webinar. The movie is available online. It's really just a celebration of one of our new supercomputers back at SFU. So this slide here is what is advanced research computing. And what we're talking about here is the scientific discovery that, as I mentioned earlier, is happening, has been happening for millennia, but now it's happening using simulation, modeling, data analysis, scientific visualization, these types of things, which were not previously much of a presence in the arsenal of the researcher. They were doing theory, they were doing experimentation, and now we have this modeling and simulation and everything surrounding it. And because this is a way of accelerating discovery, we have opportunities for national competitiveness and economic success. And what we mean by that, and we could come up with additional examples that may be pertinent to your own area of research. What we really mean is that you can do a bunch of things on a computer more quickly than you can do in a laboratory environment. So, for example, we think of drug discovery as one of the major areas where people are able to undergo a lot of experimentation in silicon, a lot of experimentation on the computer, rather than, or maybe before, doing it with actual living organisms. And so that can accelerate the scientific discovery process. And we're focused here in this seminar on the sort of the broad health sciences, but as you might imagine, this applies to almost every sector of Canadian industry. So one of the stories you might have heard of is in aircraft design, that Boeing and now Bombardier, they're doing a lot of their simulation and analysis and projection of how their new airplanes will be designed in silicon on computers. And the reason why they do this is it accelerates the time to discovery. They can try a bunch of different designs, see how things work with things like air flowing over the wing and other characteristics of the airplane, and they can do that a bunch of times in a computer, which is much faster, less expensive, and even safer than trying to do that with physical materials and design. So let's go ahead to slide 15. And what I'm going to do is mention just a few of these areas, and then I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing our resources, and we'll turn things back to Dugan. So this highlights a few of the areas that we thought might be resonant with the audience for today's webinar, and each one of these has its own story, and I don't think I'm going to try to dive into any of them right now other than to just list them and mention that really anything that you can think of in the health sciences area, including, as Dugan mentioned, things related to computational biology, chemistry, molecular dynamics, obviously, genomics. These are all things that our supercomputers are well suited for, and they're well suited because they have a lot of computational power. They're well suited because they're networked together. They're well suited because they can handle very large data sets, and they're well suited because they can give confidence that your data are going to be safe on our platforms. So these are a few of the areas, and as I said, we could take questions, or certainly Dugan and I are always available. You can email us cso@computecanada.csa or cto@computecanada.ca. Pretty easy to remember, and we'd be happy to have further discussions about where your area might be accelerated or benefit from the Compute Canada platform. So let's go on to slide 16, and as I said, or I guess we can go straight to slide 17. As I said, we're going to just sort of characterize the resources that Compute Canada has, not in a whole lot of detail. There's web pages for all of these at computecanada.ca where you can drill down a little bit. This first slide of the summary of resources, slide 17, essentially rolls up all of what we're doing. And what we're doing is through CFI, our major funding agency, and these are in partnership, funding is in partnership with the provincial agencies that provide the capital, is we're doing a big technology refresh, which basically means we're phasing out the old computers, which are most cases 5 years old or older, and we're phasing in new systems, and I'll mention a few new systems in the next slides. We're also modernizing our service delivery, and this is pretty pertinent to a lot of users because it's going to make it easier, has made it easier already to access the resources, and it means that some of the research platforms and portals that Dugan mentioned earlier, these are increasingly sort of transparent to the end user. In other words, the end user doesn't need to know that they're using a Compute Canada resource for their computation or data analysis. They can just access a resource that might be branded with one of the organizations that's running this RPP, this platform, and it just all sort of works. You know, we're not that needy to have all of our use of resources always say computecanada.ca all over the place. So slide 17 just sort of summarizes, and then let's go on to slide 18, and I'll just very briefly mention these resources that we are making available as part of what we call stage 1. This first is an overview, and it shows where the 4 systems are going to be, and it also mentions the member locations. And Compute Canada members are the organizations which choose to pay a pretty small fee, actually, and what they get in exchange for that is the ability to have their personnel join our experts. As I mentioned on the previous, I didn't highlight it, but on the previous slide it said that we had 200 experts. These are basically the people that run the systems, the sysadmins. They're also the computational analysts, programmers, visualization specialists, and other folks that can help take your application area and turn it into discovery to analysis to help accelerate your application, all these types of services that that help to make the computational platform work for you. On the next slide, slide 19, we dive into the first system. Actually, I think, yeah, it is the first system, but I think we're also going from west to east. And this is a system called Arbutus, which is a type of tree, type of cedar tree out west on Victoria Island. And this is a system which is providing our cloud platform. So a lot of these research platforms and portals are based on this. It's a Lenovo system that was put into production very quickly, very smoothly back in September, and it's working quite well. And in the picture there, you see our CEO, Mark Dietrich, with the WestGrid director, which is Lindsay Sill, and in the background is the actual system. We'll have a zoom of the system a little later on. The next slide is, again, moving west to east, is called Cedar. And this is a system which the movie actually celebrates, the 53-second movie I mentioned earlier. This is, in one way of looking at things, this is the most powerful academic supercomputer in Canada. And when I say in one way of looking at things, there are also some claims to fame of the next system as well. But this has the highest, what we call flops, the highest number of floating point operations, which is a math capability. It has a whole bunch of GPUs, which are really good for a number of different application areas, including several in the genomic area and especially in the molecular dynamics area. And it's got around 1,000 nodes, and that includes some large memory nodes and some other specialty node types. And in that picture, that was from the grand opening, and I'll point out that the leftmost person on the picture is one of your presenters, Dugan, and then the tall, geeky-looking guy straight across from him is me, Craig Newby. So let's go on to slide 21, I'm sorry. And Cedar and Graham, which is its sort of twin over in Waterloo, these are two systems that are just entering early production right now, in fact, this week. And so these are systems that will be opened up to users later in the month or maybe into July, but within the next few weeks. So very excited about these. And as I said earlier, the Cedar system has claimed to fame of being the most powerful computer. The Graham supercomputer is probably the largest academic supercomputer because you might have noticed the previous system had about 26,000 cores. Graham has about 30,000 cores. And the reason why it had more cores is because it also had fewer GPUs, and there's sort of a trade-off in the economies of these systems. But this is also an extremely powerful computer. It can accommodate a vast array of different workloads, up to thousands of CPU cores. It can handle big data. The Graham system has a 13-petabyte file system. If you can imagine the size of that, that's 13,000 terabytes, as well as a bunch of other features for getting the jobs to run quickly, whether it's a big data job, an analysis job, or a simulation job. And this, again, with Cedar, this is going into early production right now, and it will be made available to users within the next few weeks. And the last is on slide 22, and this is a system that's still forthcoming. This is what we call our large parallel system. So rather than having a focus on diverse workload types, this one is going to be focused on the biggest parallel jobs. This is a system that we hope to be on the floor and available to users no later than the beginning of 2018. And the exact schedule depends on the purchase decisions that are being made right now. So I think we're just about at the end of my presentation. This last slide, slide 23, is just that Zoom picture that I mentioned before of the cloud system called Arbutus. and it mentions that we are handling a really diverse workload. So it's not just, for those of you that are familiar with these systems, it's not just the old-style batch mode of interaction, which is more typical of supercomputers. It's all kinds of stuff. We're running our virtual machines. We're running our web-based portals, our database accessible systems, and a whole variety of things. So we're very much in the modern cloud environment, very much in the modern world of virtualization, as well as at the same time being in the world of more traditional world of supercomputing. So that's the end of my slides. Thank you for listening, and what we're going to do is turn it back to Dugan, and I think if there are questions, we'll get an interruption from the meeting host before we proceed.
Yeah, it's just a reminder to ask any questions in the chat room if you have any, and we'll just let Dugan continue because there's none for now, but we'll take more at the end.
Great, thanks. So on the slide that has a great bold resources at the top, we'll start talking about the different kinds of resources and services that Compute Canada has to offer, and how people can make use of those services. So in terms of hardware resources, Greg has just been showing you a couple of the new systems that we've been building. So these are high-performance computing machines. They're big data machines. They have CPUs. They have GPUs. They have significant data storage. He mentioned 13 petabytes at Graham. Long-term data storage, tens of petabytes of long-term storage on tape, as well as very fast storage. An example is given here on the second bullet point on the page that you may think of Compute Canada in terms of that, the tens of petabytes, very big systems. But we also do things like offer our own cloud on dedicated managed servers. And so every user who comes in and gets an account in our own cloud gets 50 gigabytes of space in a service that's very much like Dropbox for researchers. So that's something that, when you think of the scale of Compute Canada, this is a small scale thing, but it is a service offering that we have. And it's not just the access straight to the hardware, to the bare metal in the pictures that Greg was showing, but also to virtual machines that you can manage on your own. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about services. So another example of a service that we offer is called Globus, a Globus file transfer service. And so you can read about this on the Compute Canada website or go to globus.computecanada.ca, and that gets you into a system that allows you to transfer data from your laboratory, from your laptop, et cetera, into a Compute Canada system. Then you can do whatever analysis you need to do, and when you need to move it back, then you can also use the Globus file transfer system to move it back. You can also, in between, store it, leave it on that Compute Canada system, and then designate that folder that you stored it in for sharing, and then choose who else in the world is going to be able to download from that shared folder. So it is optimized for moving large quantities of data over large distances, but has a nice point-and-click interface to move the files around. So it's the best of both worlds. We're also offering portals for specialized data. We'll talk in a few minutes about Jupyter Hub as a great example of that. We support some of these research platforms and portals like GenApp. We're directly involved in support of some of them and not as directly involved in the others. In the others, the research team are the ones doing all the support. We offer a video conferencing platform, research data management services, and a common software distribution layer. So imagine you had some piece of software that was a community code or even a commercial code, and you want that distributed across Compute Canada systems. Well, if it's a community code, then we can help you compile it, optimize it, and then put it into one of our software repositories so that it's available on all of our systems. And then your group can use it on whichever system they choose. So on to the next slide on expertise. I mentioned a bit earlier that there are people on many campuses, on more than 30 campuses, available to do in-person consultations on resources that you may need. They're there to help design, optimize, or troubleshoot computer code. So we don't write software for people. but we do help people debug their software or optimize their software to run efficiently on our systems. We have expertise in installing, operating, maintaining our equipment, and then we have disciplinary teams. So, for example, we have a national team for bioinformatics, which has both people from inside the Compute Canada organization, but also people from some of the major genome centers practicing bioinformaticians to help answer questions that may come in. The same for biomolecular simulations, the same for humanities and social sciences and subatomic physics. These teams have all started in the last 2 years or so, and I don't think the whole community knows that they exist yet, but they're there, and they're a useful resource for the community. We also have visualization specialists and a national visualization team and a cybersecurity team. So on to the next slide on training. A lot of training is done at the institutional level or at the under the guidance of our regional partners. But Compute Canada does have some national offerings and training as well. For example, we're a national partner organization of an organization called Software Carpentry, which is basic coding and computational research skills for graduate students, postdocs, and faculty members. We do get involved in summer schools hosted across the country. We host individual training, ongoing support, online training, and of course we write documentation for the services that we offer and for the services that other people offer so that can be deployed on our resources. So on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about research data management. So in the last year, the granting councils have published a statement on data management principles. Compute Canada has been working for a couple of years on an approach to create federated research data repositories. We've done that in partnership with the Canadian Association of Research Libraries and others. So, for example, Research Data Canada is also involved. What Compute Canada brings to the table is expertise in big scalable storage and data movement and in software. And an organization like Calcul brings expertise in metadata, curation, preservation, and they have this national network of on-campus research data librarians. And so together we've been trying to build research data management services that are useful for all researchers, including the often neglected so-called long tail. And here the long tail refers to the large number of people with more modest research data needs as compared to the peak of the distribution, which is a small number of people with a very large need. And so on to slide 30 about federated repositories and federated discovery. If this researcher, if she comes in at the top and is looking for particular types of data, she can interact with the Federated Research Data Repository, FRDR Discovery Service, and can find data that's been put into the FRDR repository at Compute Canada, can find data that's open government data, like data.gc.ca, and then can find data in university or domain repositories. And so all of those can be found in a single search, and then if that repository is part of the Federation, she can send those data sets to Compute Canada for analysis, get the answer back, and then if she chooses, stick that answer in one of those repositories again. And so it's a system for making data discoverable, for discovering that data, but then also for moving the data to a place you can do work on it. And then when you're done the work, have a natural and easy way to take the results and, again, put them in a repository for sharing with colleagues. And so if you go on to the next slide, it shows a snapshot of the data site for FRDR. And so this is just a snapshot from data.frdr.ca, where you can go in, you can do a search. Right now, of course, we have indexed many repositories, but you won't find so many things in the repository, in the dedicated repository itself, since it's just a beta service at the moment. But it is up and running. It is possible to search, it is possible to deposit, and it is possible to test your workflow. On to the slide number 32 about PIMS and Jupyter. So Compute Canada has signed a memorandum of understanding with PIMS, that's Pacific Institute of Mathematical Sciences, that is a mathematical institute supported by NSERC. This is to support the development of so-called Jupyter hubs for Canadian researchers. So Jupyter is a notebook service. You can picture it as a web browser development environment where you can write code. You can run, for example, Python code or R code, or run RStudio, or whatever it is you need to process your data. So this lowers the barrier to scientific programming. It lowers the barrier to data analysis. It's becoming very popular among researchers. And we've allocated resources on Arbutus, the machine that Greg talked about a little earlier, to support about 8,000 users through this portal. And we already have a couple of thousand that have come into this service. And so that is a service that, if you have any questions about it, happy to answer those questions and let you know how to make use of it. But it's a very exciting way to enable more researchers to do big data research. So on to slide 33, how to get started. So you can visit computecanada.ca and sign up for an account. Once you get an account, you'll receive confirmation that you have access to the Rapid Access service and just start working. Many research groups, the Rapid Access service has enough resources allocated to it that many research groups can do everything they need to do on Compute Canada resources just using the Rapid Access service. There are, however, many users. Of our 3,000 faculty members, about 400 of them have special allocations, and this is done through our resource allocation competitions. So if you need a larger allocation of either storage or compute or cloud or whatever other resource you need, you can go through the resource allocation competitions. These happen every fall. So typically the resource allocation competition will be announced in September with a deadline in the middle of November for implementation of the awards in April. And so we're using the Canadian government fiscal year, April to April, as our allocation period. So if you have any questions about that, you can email support@computecanada.ca and get a consultation with one of the experts. So on to what I believe is our last slide. What is this Rapid Access service? Well, it gives you access to Compute Canada resources without going through a rigorous peer review process. There are, within it, there's some scope to change what you get just by a simple request. So if you get an account, then you have access to the Rapid Access service. As you start using it, if you find that you need, for example, a bit more storage, then you can just request, I need more storage, up to a certain limit, and that's the limits of all the different types of resources are on the website. But for example, you can get up to 10 terabytes of storage just by asking. After 10 terabytes, you have to ask for a resource allocation, and that becomes more complicated. But at first, all you need to do is start working, and then if you need more, just send an email to support@computecanada.ca and say, I need a bit more, and someone should be able to help you out. Okay, and I believe that's the end of our deck, and so now we're open for questions and discussion.
Thanks so much, Dugan, and we did have some questions that came in. You did just answer a couple of them about the amount of the default resources. So we did have a question about security. It was highlighted that this is, of course, a big issue in terms of health research. So there was a question about security as well as the encryption methodology for data at rest and transit, if you can maybe touch those two.
So in terms of security, if folks are worried about data privacy, for example, with personal health information, we do have a security program that our service providers, our host institutions have to sign on to, and everyone who uses the resources have to agree to. Generally speaking, if you have personal health information in your data set and it's not been anonymized and it's protected by some kind of data agreement, then what we do is talk to you case by case about what are the particular restrictions on that data agreement. In terms of encryption at rest or in transit, it is possible, for example, I mentioned the Globus file transfer tool. if you use that web interface, you can, the default is not encrypted, but you can click a button and make all of your transfers encrypted. I would have to leave it to Greg to answer the question about encryption at rest and what kind of services he envisions for encryptions on our disk system.
Right. That is not the default currently. So with the storage that we offer that's shared, you could do two things if you needed to have that. One is on a relatively small data volume. For example, if you're using the cloud platform, you could deploy your own encrypted file system, whatever sort of software you wanted to use. The cloud lets you really choose your own operating system and all the settings and that sort of thing. The other thing is, even on our shared platform, you could, of course, apply a encryption at a file level if you wanted to do that. So that's what we offer currently. I think if there was demand, we would probably look into a shared encryption method. The one other thing I'll mention related is our data retention and data disposition policy is that when data are removed, they are securely removed. So if we remove old disk drives or old tape drives from systems, and those are rendered unreadable when they're handed back to the for recycling or sent back on warranty, repair, or anything like that.
Thanks, Greg. And we had a couple more questions. Just want to note that if you want to get started, just email support@Compute Canada, and we'll direct you to the right people at the right institution to help you get started. They had a question just about Globus file transfer, and if it's similar to an FTP server. I believe we might have touched on that. Just a quick answer there. That was great, and we have a couple more after that.
Yeah, there's some similarities to an FTP server. So if you once you have an account, if you log in through globus.computecanada.ca, it's a web portal. You go into the web portal, you can access the equivalent of an FTP site is called a Globus endpoint. So we have endpoints on all of our major systems, and so you can move files in and out of our Compute Canada endpoint. You can also set up your own endpoint. So, there's a Globus Connect Personal. It'll ask you, do you want to download the Globus Connect Personal client, and you can install it on your laptop, and it will create a temporary endpoint that allows you to move things back and forth from your laptop. And it's really pretty easy to use. It's all very pointy clicky, and the difference between the underlying from the surface, it looks like an easy-to-use FTP client, but underneath, what it's doing is far more efficient than a single FTP client. So underneath, the reason we use this instead of FTP is in addition to the fact that you can click a button and then turn off your computer and walk away, and it'll manage that for you and send you an email when the transfer is actually completed. In addition to those kinds of services that don't come in FTP clients, you can picture it as the equivalent of trying to transfer a data set and opening 25 FTP streams at the same time. So it's much more efficient at moving large data sets across the network than a single FTP client would be.
Okay, great. And then there was a question about whether Compute Canada would be the right place to store de-identified health research data, as you might get from some national resources or some provincial resources. So I'm assuming, Dugan, correct me if it's de-identified, it's obviously compliant.
Yes, if you have de-identified data, then it becomes much simpler. So yes, there are public data sets of a health variety. For example, one of the logos that you saw on when talking about research platforms and portals was IHEC, the International Human Epigenomic Consortium. So that's a database of genomic data from around the world, from a large collaboration of people that's hosted on Compute Canada resources. And so those kinds of things, public data sets, de-identified data sets, you may have to have a different level of protection for something that is, depending on what you mean by de-identified or anonymized, but those are certainly appropriate. It gets into a gray area quickly If you have personal health information that's not been de-identified, then every case that we've encountered seems to be slightly different, depending on the ethics board and the province that it's in, or the person who owns the data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dugan. We probably have time for just one more question. We're sort of at time, but we will be able to, as you can see on the screen, take questions ongoing. And if you just want to connect with Compute Canada, support at or info at, and we'll get going. And then, of course, for CIHR, there's support at cihr-rsc.gc.ca. The last question was if we wanted to transfer health data into the States, are we FDA compliant?
I think the answer is no in general. So this is why I think you probably would need to have a conversation with us about your specific data set and where in Compute Canada you wanted to store it. So it is possible for us to come up with a solution that is compliant with the rule, with a particular set of rules. But we have to see what those rules are first and talk to you about it. So, I mean, unless Jonathan is connected and wants to make a different statement, I would say that the blanket answer is no. But it's not impossible. We just have to figure out what your constraints are.
Right. So the sort of takeaway message is, if you have sensitive data, give us an email, and we'll work through what we can do for you.
So if I can answer quickly, we do have some researchers using some specific platform where they go through that compliance work. But generally speaking, what Dugan described is right. Out of the box, we are not compliant. We need to do things in order to do it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I think there was a couple more questions, and we'll reach out to people directly. But I think I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and I'll pass the mic back over to CIHR, and who we'd like to thank very much for the opportunity to present today and share the services available to researchers.
So it's Phil Pasek again. I just wanted to say thank you again to Dr. O'Neill, Dr. Newby, and thanks to all the participants for listening in. As I mentioned, for those of you who aren't listening live, the email addresses on the screen there, support at CIHR or info at Compute Canada. If you have questions at any time for either of the agencies, we'll be able to field that. CIHR's email address up there is for our contact center, and that's a generic email inbox for Compute Canada. So once again, thank you all for joining us today. And we'll be doing it all over again in French on Thursday with different presenters, much the same content. Thanks again for participating. Have a good afternoon.